Behind me is a ruined, bombed, burned city. Behind, graves, 100 defeated German regiments, 22 divisions. Behind, death in the snow. Only we survived, although in Berlin we are considered dead, although there they wish the whole Sixth Army to lie in one grave for all. Generals, officers, non-commissioned officers, privates, every last man. But we are living. And all the high-sounding words about frontline comradeship, the morning crepe and lowered flags do not change anything. Behind remain kilometre after kilometre. Step by step we move forward. Every few metres we stop for a break. There is no more strength, and the will is lost in Stalingrad. It is buried by volleys of rocket mortars under the ruins of a huge city on the Volga, under the ice stained with blood, the lid of the snow coffin, torn to shreds together with those killed by shells. Hours pass, but the tired line of surviving soldiers still stretches its way, uphill and downhill, stopping and moving on again. The sun is slipping towards the west. The huge battlefield has already disappeared behind the horizon, and we still meet again on our way a lot of Russian guns, mortar after mortar, tank after tank. We see reserve regiments and divisions. They stand and have stood here for weeks now to close any breakthrough. We were surrounded by a ring 30, 40 kilometres thick. Our battle group alone was opposed by 120 rocket mortars, and we didn't have a single gun, but we had infirmaries, dressing stations, cemeteries and gravediggers. It darkens my eyes when I think that the enemy was able to strike an even more powerful blow. Now we see it for ourselves, and we realise the war is lost. Where the Volga makes its last bend to the east lies the town of Krasnoarmysk. On its hilly western edge are barracks surrounded by dense rows of barbed wire. 6 watchtowers with machine guns and powerful searchlights. It is not allowed to come close to the fence. In the first days of February 1943, the barracks are overcrowded. The surviving soldiers and officers of the Sixth Army are stuffed here like herrings in a barrel. But they are indifferent to the cramped conditions. The last months have made them indifferent to everything. But the cold wave is hard to bear. At 45 degrees below zero, the prisoners think, drowning is better than freezing. So they move a couple of centimetres closer to each other. Scraps next to scraps, rags next to rags, thousands of lice crawling from one to another, from bunk to bunk, infecting the exhausted bodies with rash. Their temperature is also 40 degrees, only not frost, but heat. But none of the prisoners notice it. Next to me on the bunks lies a colonel infantryman. What happened to Colonel Prestian? He shot himself. And his adjutant Keller? Shot himself. And Eisber? Killed. Do you know anything about the general in command of the 371st? Yeah, shot himself. Why? Why, indeed. After a week, it's getting a little more spacious. A lot of the men who were lying next to us are resting outside. It's because of rash, dysentery, loss of resistance. For about 70 days, we had almost no food. And now people die of hunger with a piece of bread and sausage in their hand. The body doesn't accept anything. Doctors shake their heads and open the next one. The autopsy shows narrowing and antiperistalsis of the intestines and stomach. They cannot fulfill their functions. 90% of all prisoners went to the camp with high fever. Despite the most careful care, many of them can no longer be saved. Russian doctors are fighting for everyone's life. Nurses sit by the bedsides day and night. They do everything they can, sparing no effort and even their own lives, for many of them become infected and in a few days repeat the path of their patients. One of the prisoners, while opening a tin can, cut his left hand. 3 drops of blood came out of the wound. That's enough. The injured man lies down on his bunk. 5 minutes later, he dies. Hunger psychosis takes hold despite regular meals. We have lost the measure of all things. We fear dying of exhaustion if we don't eat something every half hour. It creates a feeling of unquenchable hunger. It's been 2 weeks. We don't know exactly. It doesn't interest us. The daily routine is simple. Sleep, nap, eat. And we go to squat in the courtyard. in the open air, where telephone wires buzz from the frost and sentries beat their feet. We all have diarrhea. 2 of the prisoners have already been driven away by the sentries with shots from the fence they've gotten too close to for privacy from the others. We got bullets in the head often enough, but in the arse, it's no use at all. One day, an elegant limousine pulls up outside the barracks. A colonel in a half-fur coat and an elderly woman get out of it and head for the camp commandant. The barometer of our bunk atmosphere rises immediately. In a few minutes, the most incredible rumours begin to circulate. Minutes of tense waiting pass. And already the colonel, with a woman dressed in black, is standing at our bunk. He addresses us with words of friendly greeting. "Good day, gentlemen." Then he sits down on a rickety stool. While he lights a cigarette, everyone stares at it avidly. Then he hands out a 3/4 full packet. This is no longer a matter of politeness, no respect for rank and file. All ravenously throw themselves on cigarettes. The picture is unattractive. The colonel smiles. He begins to talk. An old woman translates. "Gentlemen, I've come to tell you that you're going to Moscow today." "We don't need this, Mr. Colonel." It was my neighbour, Colonel Weber, who spoke for all the others. "We'll freeze to death in the cattle cars at 45 degrees below zero. I'd rather they put us up against the wall." "But, gentlemen, you're in the Soviet Union, not in Germany. We treat our prisoners like human beings. Who said anything about cattle cars? You will, of course, travel in passenger cars." "We haven't noticed any particularly good treatment so far." That may be so. After the kind of battle we've been through, life is slow to return to normal. What did you expect exactly? That we'd send you to a rest home? Feed you ham and wine? No, gentlemen, you are not our guests. We didn't invite you to our place. We didn't invite you to the Volga. Nevertheless, we'll treat you decently, and after the war you'll return to your homeland. Well, we'll see about that. But first we need not passenger cars, but better food and sanitary conditions. We can't offer you anything else. Everything here has been destroyed and devastated by your own hand. There is not enough transportation to provide regular food for 90,000 prisoners. In addition, we fear the outbreak of epidemics as soon as it gets warmer. Therefore, our government wants you to leave the area as soon as possible. We'll start with the generals and senior officers. You'll go through the Laos and then go to the train station. For the first time we were shown in the mirror our recent past, our own deeds and their consequences, and so the words addressed to us have gradually taken effect. But at the moment we are unable to experience anything but horror. Half an hour later we are all sitting on our bunks in our own clothes. Our stuff has been tied up in knots and taken to the extermination chamber. From there our clothes should return insect-free. There are all sorts of speculations about the real purpose of our trip. No one believes in passenger cars. Already the command, "Get out," is heard, and we are still just getting our miserable rags. We hastily pull them on our emaciated bodies. But some articles of clothing are missing. Apparently, the prisoners of war, who were manning the bathhouse and the washerwoman, left something for themselves as a souvenir. So it turns out that the colonel goes out in socks, and the major in his underwear. All the same, the station is only 2 kilometers away. We move at the pace of the funeral procession. Legs do not obey. Now we ourselves notice that we just jumped off the gravedigger's shovel. That's why it took us an hour to get to the tracks where our train is standing. We are led past the freight cars, past the common cars. Wait, yes, indeed. In front of us are bought cars, real bought cars. We can't believe our eyes. The Soviet colonel kept his word. Allocation to the cars is quick. In 5 minutes we are already sitting in our compartment. The shelves are filled with snow-white linen. We look at each other. No one dares to lie on it in his dirty pants. But the confusion quickly passes. I pull myself up on my hands to the top shelf and want to get comfortable, as I hear a young woman's voice. "Good evening, gentlemen. Have you received cigarettes today?" From surprise, I turn sharply and almost fall down. At the bottom stands smiling, shining clean girl in a white apron and with a tray in her hand. On the tray are packs of cigarettes. When prisoners are asked if they have received anything, of course they say no. But this time they did. They didn't give us cigarettes in Krasnoarmeysk, and now everyone gets a whole pack, and even matches. Overcoats and hats hang on a hook. I lie on the top shelf and inhale a spicy cigarette. After many weeks without smoking, my eyes are swimming in circles. The lamp, the shelves, the window become blurred, and I can no longer tell who I am and where I am, whether it is true or a dream. Or maybe all this is already in the other world, and I have long since decayed in a mass grave. Or did my mind go blank at the last moment? Is it possible that after this meat grinder, I am in a passenger carriage going through Stalingrad in a compartment with snow-white linen, with a cigarette in my hand, carelessly unbuttoning an old uniform, and a Russian girl is talking to me in a friendly manner? No, it's incomprehensible. It's incredible. It can't be true. I bite my tongue to feel the pain and feel that all this is happening in reality, as I see and hear it. No, I am not dead or insane, but neither am I a peaceful tourist travelling to Moscow on a travel agency voucher. I am only a prisoner of war being treated unexpectedly well. That evening my compartment mates and I never cease to be amazed. We are provided with bread and lard, meat, sausage, fish, sugar, given spoons and forks, and everyone is even given a bar of toilet soap. We just don't know where to put these riches. You can't deny that our spirits have lifted. Just a few hours ago we were sitting on our wooden bunks, thinking and fantasizing about what would happen to us, and waiting for another slice of bread. No wonder our barometer didn't point to changeover then. No one could tell us what the future would bring. True, even now no one can tell us that, but the feeling of constraint, the feeling that in any situation you are looked at only as an enemy, as a shot predator, from which even in the cage you cannot take your eyes off. Gone was the feeling of fear that we would have to answer for all the Nazi atrocities, for things we only knew about by hearsay, the feeling of guilt that we never did anything against it. Now all of that has somehow receded into the background. A man breathes again, and the cramped compartment fills with optimism. In shirt and pants, we lie on our shelves, under white blankets and smoke. Sometimes we look out of the window when we pass a station or pass a military train with tanks and other equipment, which rumbles past us to the front. Our conversation, and understandably so, revolves around the same theme, the uncertainty of our future. After the vivid lesson the Soviets have taught us, it is no longer the outcome of the war that concerns us first and foremost. The defeat of Germany is almost universally regarded as an inevitable fact. Now we are concerned with our own fate. There's plenty of room for imagination. The best thing would be an exchange of prisoner officers through Sweden or even Japan. We argue until the first snore reminds us of the need to sleep. In the morning we wash, shave, have breakfast. Then the doctor comes in. He listens to the complaints of each of us. After all, we have all received something to remember Stalingrad, pains and superficial wounds, fever and broken bones. With great patience, we begin to be treated with powders, ointments, pills, and in parting with a kind word. Major Pull is still bandaging his leg wound when a short Russian lieutenant colonel enters the compartment. He takes a seat on the bottom shelf. In his hands he holds a large map and many newspapers. He informs us about the situation on the fronts. We hear the names of cities and towns where we spent the last winter and which 3 months ago were considered a deep rear area. Somehow it grabs the heart when we think of the many, many kilometres we had to walk to get here, when we think of the countless German soldiers' cemeteries left along the way, to the left and to the right of the road on which we marched forward. Now the war is rolling back towards Germany, and we ourselves are rolling towards Moscow. The conversation doesn't go well. It revives only when the conversation turns to the weapons with which the Russians are now advancing. As people tactically and technically educated, We are united in our appreciation of Russian mortars and multi-barrel rocket launchers. Schultz, the lowly infantry major from the top shelf, now sitting downstairs next to me, is fuming about the failings of our command. Why didn't we copy the Russians' multi-barrel rocket launchers? We've experienced what kind of casualties they cause. Shouldn't we learn from the enemy in the course of a war? I think it would have taken us much farther. Where exactly it would take us, he doesn't say. Maybe he's thinking of the Urals, or even Moscow and Baku. But we're not interested in that. It's all completely behind us. Only Poole, a full major with a shot leg, still can't let go of that thought. That's right, Schultz. If those upstairs had reacted faster, we probably wouldn't have been swatted down like that on the Volga. I mean, not so much the 6-barrel mortars. Well, them too. Of course too. But tanks, that's more important. The T-34 is what we should have had. It goes everywhere. We should have copied it, just it alone. And that would have been enough. Whoever has the T-34 will win the war. The Soviet lieutenant colonel, smiling, agrees with Poole. Yes, of course you are right, our tanks are good. But that is not the main thing. Where and at what pace they move determine the people sitting in them. And our people know what they want. That's what you've all seen. Or maybe you still haven't. But what happened to you is just the beginning. And you can calculate where it ends. Regular meals, medical care, and the Russian lieutenant colonel's information about the situation at the fronts, which we look forward to every time, and last but not least, plenty of sleep, become a normal daily routine to which we quickly get used to. To me, it would be nice if the train would run like this between Stalingrad and Vladivostok until the first bell rings, heralding peace. But here I find myself at odds with the other companions. Sufficient food turns the war-weary and life-weary officers into a group of people who, although glad to have got out of the mass grave on the Volga and can breathe a sigh of relief, but each of whom again begins to show his own understanding of things, character, upbringing, and temperament, and so sharply that the first cracks in the monolith of our common destiny are already becoming visible. Some people consider every truck they see as American, provided by Lend-Lease, and praise it as a technical miracle, while others bow before the Red Star. If Major Poole finds no words to express his gratitude for the treatment of his gunshot wound, his vis-à-vis considers every visit by the train doctor a clever propaganda stunt. For most of the passengers on our train, it is now clear that in the past year, the Wehrmacht has overreached, that the goals set in comparison with our forces were, we say, excessive. But there are those who still consider the Urals an attainable goal. While I jokingly express my wish to stay longer in our train, 2 officers are already working out the first plan of escape. In any case, we, several majors in one compartment, after 4 days have already diverged so far from each other that we soberly state that it is impossible to bring our views to a common denominator. However, we will have to talk about this topic many times. We have enough time. The long ribbon of railroad tracks holds us for many more days. To the monotonous clatter of the wheels, it is best to lie stretched out on the shelf and watch the puffs of cigarette smoke. The experience passes in front of me. Quickly and vaguely, the former years, slowly and with sharp contours, the last months, encirclement, resistance, the last cartridge, and the last blow, from which I could not defend myself. Yes, it is almost a miracle that I managed to escape alive from the cauldron of death. But it is also amazing that we all resisted so long and so unitedly. It's doubly amazing when I look at my compartment mates. No, I have nothing against them personally, against their thoughts, against known variance in perception and understanding of things. Everyone has his own head on his shoulders. But we have so little in common in our goals and desires that one can't help but begin to doubt whether this much lauded front-line comradeship exists at all. You begin to think deeper and remember the mercenary soldiers of Frundsberg and Wallenstein, and then you ask yourself a question. What, in fact, binds the officer and the soldier who gives the order? Is it only the oath taken jointly? No, because they swore allegiance to one single person, Hitler, and not to the people. This alone demanded the expression of their own point of view, and led to the emergence of different opinions and even opposition, because everyone put a different meaning into the oath. But then came the successes in Poland, in the north and west of Europe. Many hundreds of kilometres were left behind. The officers had travelled together with the soldiers, and, looking at each other, they knew that each of them at the same time was drenched in sweat, trembling and cursing when they made a rush, fired, sought shelter. It brought them closer together. Someone said the word comradeship. It was taken up by a chorus of voices, and soon it was heard from all the loudspeakers, printed in bold type in all the newspapers. But everyone understood it differently because there was no common purpose. If you look through the book of German history, such a common goal can be found as an exception only in those battles in which the struggle was for the freedom of entire peoples. That is why the names of Arminius, Prince Eugene of Savoy, and Blücher have not faded down to our days. A whole bunch of writers had a hand in twisting concepts after the First World War. And they succeeded, there's no denying it. A drop is a stone. That's why we perceived the war as a baptism of steel, according to Junger's template, and frontline camaraderie, according to Dwinger's template. All our experiences were normalized, and we ourselves were not conscious of it. More than that, we forcibly squeezed the stubborn reality into the school form of our perceptions. We gave our soldiers a fake coin and told them it was gold. But we ourselves believed what we said, and we were generally regarded as honest brokers. And yet I should long ago have wondered about the meaning of this much-vaunted frontline comradeship. I was reminded of my first commander of the war years. I served under him in 1939. He was a man of strict rules. In a morally scanty atmosphere, he tried to preserve his moral character and firmly held in his hands the reins of education of officers. Here are 10 vices of which he reminded us day after day, striving to exterminate them at any cost. Drunkenness, gluttony, smoking, negligence, love of full women, self-enrichment, self-aggrandizement, deification of Ika, dreaming of vacations and driving on the left. We laughed at it at the time, thought his rebekies were exaggerated, and the whole thing was a crank. But it was more than a fad. On the one hand, there was a grain of truth in his words, and on the other hand, they could at least serve as a reason to talk about comradeship. After all, soldiers and officers of all ranks reduced the concept of comradeship to a dozen beers, an organised suckling pig, and a pack of cigarettes shared by all. They called themselves camarades, but in reality they were at best team players, always ready to elbow their way in when it came to their personal gain, their careers, or the second half of the 10 Commandments. But the faithful old camaraderie was poetized by the court Odo writers and war correspondents, for which they had enough of such expressions as, "Paul, you shoot and I'll jump," the chorus of "Hurrah!" in honour of the supreme commander of the Wehrmacht and the field bivouac on the rocks, to top it all off with a couple of sentimental soldier songs. Enough to write frontline reports and thick novels and to influence the tear glands of the people on the home front. After all, people became less discriminating and perceived the fictions they were presented with as a hymn to frontline comradeship. That was just what was required. Whole contingents of 2 decades died on the battlefields, and everything was portrayed as it never happened and could not be in reality. A false idea of strength was inculcated. The people were supposed to believe it and fight harder. Thus, the average German spent his whole life faithfully and bravely contented himself with the illusion of comradeship, first as a child, then at school, and then at the front, and it ended with the song "I Had a Comrade." So, God is with us, for the King and the Fatherland. God is with us, for the Führer, the people, and the Reich. The praised comradeship became a frame for the heroic death that swallowed up in the bloom of years more than one generation of German youth. This front comradeship became, so to speak, the golden trim of millions of postcards with death notices. And no one wanted to see that the sum of the small external signs of comradeship, far from creating a real comradeship. It probably required a new outlook for such a true comradeship, to be born on the basis of common interests and a high purpose. Lighting a new cigarette, I glance down. 3 of my companions are sitting there. They are clearly busy now with point 7 of my old commander's commandments, self-glorification. A lowly infantry major is ranting, "The spike in my battalion was first rate. In the penultimate week, we were then in the Voropanovo area. 2 soldiers came to me and asked me to send them to the divisional rear. Well, you understand, to organize something. Of course, I don't mind. In the evening, both of them came back with their hands full. They brought bread and cigarettes. I don't care where they got them from. But that's the main thing, that's why I'm telling this story. One of them reaches into his pocket and puts 2 packs of Uno cigarettes on the table. Just the ones I smoke, and I haven't had them for a long time. Can you imagine, in our position at the time? Gentlemen, I must admit I was truly touched. Isn't this the kind of camaraderie you read about in books? You won't find it anywhere else. It's been a week since we left. The train is still going through white steppes, through snow-covered forests. Telegraph poles flicker. Towns and villages are left behind. The train stops only occasionally. Our compartment became calmer. Conversations in the neutral zone between the collapsed front of the recent past and the barbed wire of the near future became silent. We stopped just stringing together days and events. It's time to reflect on your own place in this battle, to realize what you did right or wrong and what justified it. It's time to sort out your own thoughts. There are many questions that require a clear and definitive answer from me, but one of them is particularly disturbing and does not give me peace. How could it happen that I fought to the end, that I stood to the last, although I had long ago realized the meaninglessness of our understanding of duty? For the first time, this question arose before me, when in early January was broken 79th Infantry Division, and its number was erased from the General Staff maps. After all, not only a symbolic one has grown on the territory of the factory, an invisible cross over the grave of the division. No, next to it stood a smaller cross, but a real one, over the grave of my soldiers who died there. And apart from my own will, what I had vaguely begun to realize in those first days of the new year now turned in me into an irrefutable certainty. No, I could not absolve myself of the guilt for having led a whole battalion to its death. In spite of all doubts, in spite of my reasoning, in the end I always only answered jawohl when it was necessary to carry out far from real orders and throw my companies into bloody battles. Of course, I myself went with the soldiers when the going got tough. I risked my life as well as others. But I set an example for them, and it was fatal for 700 of them. Look what a dashing officer I am. Where I am, there is victory. Where I am, there is a banner around which you must rally. And they followed me. Everyone in Stalingrad followed someone. Paulus. For OKH, generals. For his army commander, I. For my division commander, and the soldiers. For me. They followed me from position to position, from shop to shop, until from a strong battalion was not left a pitiful handful. They were driven to fight. They were driven to die. And I too am guilty of that, as was my division commander. Maybe not to such an extent, but the 700 dead and maimed look at me as soon as I close my eyes. They ask, "And you?" We all looked up to you. You ordered us where to go, you were with us, and you cannot hide from us for nothing, as if there was never a Red October. What do I say to them? To them and to myself? All I can say weighs little. Compared to the 700 dead and maimed, it is nothing. Yes, from the very beginning I stood for the breakthrough, tried to convince the general, but this does not absolve me of guilt. It's all just words. I had to act. But how? The engineer battalion was the least suitable. Forever attached to other units, for days and weeks, subordinated to other commanders, divided into groups and teams. It practically found itself concentrated in my hands only when we attacked in its entirety or occupied the defence, as it was on the territory of the factory. But the thought of rebelling against the order did not occur to me then. But it could not have occurred to me at that time, for despite some doubts, I had been chasing victory only 3 months before. And then it was too late for our battalion. After Christmas, only infantry could have stopped a battle that had become hopeless. But it didn't. Its commanders persisted in their obedience, as if there were nothing more natural in the world than to make whole regiments bleed to death without even asking the meaning of the sacrifice. Deprived of a sense of responsibility, the officers have become the instruments of a blind force of self-destruction. But would I have acted differently as an infantry commander? Probably not either. I would have been just like them, without knowing a moment's rest, following orders, giving orders, mending breaches, reinforcing positions, making phone calls, ordering mines and wire fences to be set up, and defending the basement. And my brain would be drilling the same thought all the time. What will those over there do to us when we fire our last round? And all the time I would answer myself the same thing. You have nothing to ask? Look at that factory. Then you will understand what awaits us. And if someone started to tell me otherwise, I'd say to him, I want to live too, so go away and leave me alone. That's exactly what it would be, don't kid yourself. From afar, everything looks different, even from the flower pot. There I sat there, rattling my fist in my pocket, waiting in vain, but nothing ever happened, and then, to dull my conscience, I decided to be with the soldiers to the end. I wanted to share their fate with them, no matter what it turned out to be. Even if it was death, nothing else was waiting for us. And it would be the best way out, to die at the walls of a huge city, where others already lay. But even that was not given to me. My general burned the whole division in the fire, and thus fulfilled his task. Disbandment of the defeated division was the logical consequence, and the end of the battle I had to endure together with shrapnel groups of foreign parts. But when at the end of January I took up positions at Tsaritsa, I still had the opportunity in the penultimate hours to act as I thought an infantry commander should have done. I could honourably surrender, and at least on this piece of land stop the bloodshed. I must honestly say that if my old battalion were still alive, no oath, no orders would have stopped me from marching in full marching formation to the prisoners. But the fighting group to which I belonged was incredibly diverse, not only in the numbers of units from which it was hastily formed, but also in its attitude toward Hitler and the Battle of the Cauldron. There were quite a few fanatical Nazis here who had to beware. Hundreds of honest soldiers who had arbitrarily ended the war for themselves were already lying in the snow, shot for cowardice at the verdict of a court-martial. I did not want to be among them. My death would do no one any good. In spite of all the measures of the German command, the hand of the clock was already close to 12, and the decomposition of the troops was increasing. 2 or 3 more days and the curtain would fall. Therefore, one way or another, it was too late to give an impetus to a complete cessation of hostilities by partial surrender. The only thing left for me to do was to take care of the soldiers, to protect them from senseless orders, and to keep them safe from the field gendarmerie. In doing so, my adjutants and I turned a blind eye when individual soldiers stopped resisting and crossed the front line on their own. This is what I remember now, on the train. That's what I'm summarizing. But putting my hand on my heart, I cannot say that it is balanced. Let there be 1,000 reasons and excuses, but one thing is clear. My guilt towards my soldiers is enormous, and that guilt weighs on me. I myself, if I may say so, parachuted out of the burning airplane, and the rest of the crew perished. Whether I will find solid ground beneath my feet remains to be seen. But when I leave this country, leaving my battalion lying in its soil forever, I will not be silent any longer. I will tell the sons of my soldiers what their fathers died for, to open the eyes of youth, to prevent a repetition, to warn against the Third Punic War. That must be my task. And only if I succeed will I feel a little better in my own skin. But that is a long way off. For now I am still a prisoner of war who is supposed to be silent while the guns talk. Winter is coming to an end in Camp Number 27. On the wide camp street, the prisoners of war, generals and senior officers stroll back and forth. Others stand in small groups. Although a good deal of time has passed since the surrender of the Sixth Army, Stalingrad is still the main topic of our conversations. In contrast to POWs from other parts of the Eastern Front, many officers of the Sixth Army have become fierce opponents of the Nazi regime. We were cured of empty phrases. After all, we had performed a somersault mortale from the trapeze under the circus dome. Most of us crashed in the fall, but the rest, including us, fell into the saving netting. Here in Krasnogorsk, a small town near Moscow, we rubbed our eyes, looking around, talking, reading, comparing, and taking up books and newspapers again. If the enormous scale and severity of the battle on the Volga changed the arithmetic of war, the new things that now surround us do the same with our personal multiplication table, with our consciousness. Freed from the heavy oppression of orders, thinking independently and looking at the most essential things, we are gradually becoming more and more aware of the bloody basis on which the whole system we have served so far rests. We are beginning to realize that we have been following the path that was to lead to the destruction of our fatherland. We now know where the Soviet Union got the strength to drive back the German invaders, but we have not yet come to any decision, to any action that would give us inner freedom. The oath is what ties our hands, though our minds are gradually becoming clearer. The oath is what shuts our mouths when we are summoned to Barracks No. 1. There we are interrogated. I sit again in the strict room opposite the officer. He treats me with exquisite politeness. I am offered coffee, cigarettes. We talk about Berlin and Paris, about the situation in Germany and my well-being, about God and the world, about the meaning of this war. The casual conversation is directed with secular dexterity in such a way that questions of a military nature are more and more insistently raised, but they are met with resistance. However, a few friendly words restore the interrupted thread of conversation. Political problems suddenly become the centre of attention, and I, a miserable prisoner of war, am again amazed at the education of my interlocutor. We smoke another cigarette and the conversation ends. "We'll see each other again," says the Soviet officer. "Perhaps by the next time you will remember what you could not remember today. And there you are again, standing on a camp street, thinking, comparing. And you mentally take your hat off to the intellectual flexibility of this man, who by the will of my government is my enemy. You marvel at his reading, his ability to see the interconnectedness of things. But in the end, some synthesis must emerge out of all this thinking and reasoning, out of contradictions and glimpses of realization, out of victory and defeat, out of false decisions, and out of the desire to prevent the ruin of Germany, out of what was done against one's own will, and out of one's own desires. Some complete, all-embracing clarity must come, which will include the individual right thoughts, and then some new path must open up on which we can embark. Before, we learned to risk our lives without asking what for. Now, in contrast to the past, we must give ourselves a clear answer to this question, which decides our destiny, and then show that, having clearly realized why, we are ready to spare our lives for a noble purpose. While we are indulging in these reflections, one day the officer on duty comes and reads us a long list of names. I'm on the list. "Come on, let's go," resounds around us, and 20 minutes later we are striding through the gatehouse, where we are once again checked in and checked out. Holding a reddish satchel in my hand, in which my miserable belongings are stowed, I board a large bus waiting for us at the camp gate. It quickly takes the prisoners to the railroad station. A few minutes more, and the train takes us farther away from the barracks, where a big argument has started. Where to, none of us knows. And those remaining in Krasnogorsk continue to analyze the situation day by day. As a result of aerial bombing, Germany has already become a battlefield. Peasants, artisans and workers are left homeless and without means of subsistence. The Nazis are to blame. They have isolated Germany. They have created the hatred that surrounds us everywhere. They have plunged the entire German people into disaster. The war cannot be won, there is no doubt about that. Its continuation threatens the very existence of the nation. So the only question is, to be or not to be our Vaterland. Therefore, the war must end as soon as possible. But no one will negotiate with Hitler, so only his elimination and the overthrow of his regime will open the way to peace. We must say this to the German people. It is necessary, even from captivity, to influence the command of army groups and armies, to make it clear that the war is finally lost. Then we must eliminate terror and create a firm order. The first task of the new government is to withdraw all German troops to the German borders and begin negotiations for peace. This is the only way that can bring the Hash homeland back into the family of all nations. On the basis of this concept, the National Committee Free Germany was formed in the summer of 1943. But not only officers and soldiers took this courageous step. Together with them in one ranks were writers and doctors, deputies and trade union leaders. On their side were public figures whom Hitler had deprived of citizenship, outlawed, persecuted, and persecuted. They had been living in the Soviet Union for many years, but they continued to love their people, and in their hearts they had one desire, to return to the Germany of freedom. And so, putting aside all other contradictions, those who had sacrificed 10 years of their own lives in sacrifice to their convictions, and those who only now, after the bitterness of defeat, had gained insight, had regained consciousness, the ability to distinguish between good and evil, extended their hands to each other. All of them have one common noble goal. The initiators of the National Committee Free Germany have become the continuators of the traditions of German-Russian relations. The symbol and example for them was the joint national liberation struggle, which, in 1812-1813, with the support of the Russian people, was led from the Russian soil by German patriots against Napoleon's domination. These true patriots of Germany also appealed to the conscience of the German people through the heads of their official rulers. Recalling the glorious names of Baron von Stein, Arndt, Clausewitz and Yorck, the manifesto of the National Committee Free Germany proclaimed, "Like them, we will spare no effort and our lives to do everything to develop the liberation struggle of our people and accelerate the overthrow of Hitler. On the bank of the Kama River is the prisoner of war camp number 97. It houses the bulk of the officers taken prisoner in Stalingrad. There are 10,000 of them, and their ideological development is very different. Some of them have become stupid, embittered, silent, and interested in nothing. They feel sorry for themselves from morning till night. The most they can do is to tell old vulgar jokes, exchange cookery recipes, and tell each other autobiographies which should tell us what kind of a hero is sitting here in the prison camp. Some of these officers are afraid that their rations will not be reduced, and so they save a piece of bread day by day in order to prepare in advance for such a stroke of fate. But in the hospital wards, there are not only those prisoners who have undermined their own health, but also simulants. After all, the food is better here, and anyone with a fever receives it. Unseemly scenes are played out, from stuffing and heating thermometers with matches to deliberate infection. The record for being in a hospital bed belongs to one senior officer who lied to doctors for 3 months until he was exposed. We're ashamed of him. Along with these officers who have lost all dignity, there is also a group of hardcore Nazis in the camp. They try to keep an emphasized bravado and greet each other loudly with the words, "Heil Hitler." But I remember that in the cauldron they were the first to denounce their Führer and to use such expressions as traitor and pig. Here, too, they assume a heroic pose and play at perseverance, supposedly a truly Germanic virtue. The barbed wire and the need to obey guards, the narrowness of camp life and the lack of comfort fuel their brown passions. They make camp life harder on themselves and others, contradicting the camp guards in whatever they can, and rejoicing like teenagers if they manage to pull some prank. Moreover, blackmailing other prisoners, they write down all anti-state statements, threaten to be executed after their return to Germany, and thus isolate themselves from everyone else. There are not very many such Nazis. However, they make themselves known, especially on Nazi holidays. Then they put on all their orders and sing nationalistic marches, which only emphasizes the agony of Hitler's Germany. The contemptuous glances of such prisoners of war fall above all on the members of the anti-fascist activists, on those officers and soldiers who, even before Stalingrad, even before the formation of the National Committee in 1941, drew a line under the past and uncompromisingly opposed Hitler against war for peace. Among us prisoners of war, they are the vanguard, the intelligence, marching ahead of a huge marching column that is still just revising its ideological NZ. Of course, they are especially hated by the Prussians and others with swastikas. The atmosphere is heating up to the point where it seems that just a little more, and the murders by the verdict of the secret court, FEMA, will begin. I don't belong to any group yet. Together with others who have travelled the same path, I am striving to find the courage necessary to make a decision for myself. One of us must make a beginning, make a breakthrough while the fronts in the camp are not yet permanently entrenched. In the barracks and on the streets there is an argument over the last obstacles to making such a move. But how insignificant they are in comparison with the tremendous turn which has already been accomplished in my mind. The first members of the National Committee are going on a big trip. They are visiting all the camps to broaden the base of the movement and activate the bulk of the prisoners of war. The right step can only be taken by someone who has realized everything. Therefore, one has to fight for each one individually. In order to make the voice of the National Committee sound weighty, it must be sure that behind every appeal it makes to the German people stands firmly and unitedly the entire army of POWs. 4 German officers also arrive at our camp. The small delegation of the National Committee is headed by Major General Lattmann, who commanded the 14th Panzer Division in Stalingrad and is known to us as a brave commander. Everywhere he and other members of the delegation are warmly welcomed. But some behave with restraint, and some, just seeing the uniform of a German officer, immediately point out the light stain on his chest from a sporulated German eagle with a swastika. Such a consistent line is frightening above all to those who, cloaked in words of oath, want to wait it out when called upon to take a clear stand. Nevertheless, the great conversation that began back in Stalingrad, in Krasnogorsk, or here on the Kama continues, resuming depending on the platform on which everyone has already entered in the meantime. The discussion centres on the German war situation and moral questions. The conversation is open and relaxed, including the mission of the National Committee and the prospects for Germany. I am now ready to take the decisive step. I want to take part in the salvation of my people. But in spite of all that I have experienced, in spite of all that I have learned, in spite of all that I have realized over time, this decision has not come easily to me. Yes, I experienced the death of an entire army, mental paralysis, the order to die. I saw crushed and flattened soldiers, frost-bitten legs, empty shell casings, hands raised up. I can still hear the frantic screams and death cries in my ears. I can still smell the bitter odour of the fires. All this, even the lousy rags and rash, would have made sense only if it could have saved the German cities from the fate of Stalingrad, saved the German people from destruction. But the battle on the Volga did not achieve this goal, and did not educate the rulers of Germany. In Berlin's Sportpalast, they raised the banner of total war, the banner of madness that condemns women to the nightmare of night bombings and drives children to the front. The law that ordered us to die has become a death sentence for our entire nation. Not to let this sentence be carried out, to resist the executioners ready to carry it out, to say a resounding no to the imperative of suicide and to deliberately renounce the oath of allegiance sworn to the person of Adolf Hitler. This is the dictate of honor and the moral duty of every honest German. Yes, it is also clear to me now, so obvious that there is nothing more to think about. And yet I think over my step for the 1000th time. After all, like many others, I have a lot to do with the German armed forces, which I have always been proud of and wanted to be proud of. Here was my home, here my inclinations, my faith, my idealism and the happiness of my life found shelter. I shed my sweat and blood for the German army, and in it I lost my best friends and comrades, in France, on the Don, and in the workshops of Stalingrad. I do not want to feel shame neither before Wolfgang Kiel, nor before Oberfeldwebel Limbach, nor before many others. They died in battle, believing that they acted correctly, and knowing that I am with them. And now I must tell them that these battles brought trouble instead of happiness, that our courage served false purposes, that our lives were aimless. For that is what the step I want to take means. But it cannot be helped. I must take this path, I dare not. I have no right to persist in a lie if I have seen it. This is what the living demand of me, but even the dead could not wish that millions of other people should remain entangled in the web of lies and perish in it. Germany must live even after she has gone down the false path from which she must get off. And so I do the hardest thing a man can do. I cross out many years of my life with a bold cross, declare them meaningless, throw them into the dustbin of history. The motherland will understand me. It will still need me in the future, like others who have found the courage to realize their mistakes and start a new life. All my strength, all my experience, all that I have, I want to give in order to correct the mistakes of the past and to make my best contribution to the building of a new building of the German nation. On the third day, at the suggestion of a delegation of the National Committee Free Germany, a meeting was called in the camp. Almost all the officers come. Latman speaks of his motives for joining the National Committee. His words are convincing. The applause is stronger than I expected. The old Nazis tried to intimidate the prisoners of war yesterday with their threats. Latman is a traitor, and whoever aids him, let him blame himself. They are sitting here in the hall, watching what is happening like augurs, registering the slightest movement. But the masses can no longer be intimidated. The officers, who 6 months ago looked soberly into the eyes of death and passed through the hurricane fire of Stalingrad, have now regained their composure. Now they want clarity. They welcome any opportunity to learn new things, compare them with the past, and draw conclusions. Only a small proportion of prisoners succumb to the intimidation of the Nazis. They are the weak, the cowardly. I ask for the floor and, addressing the assembled officers, I say, like all of you, I took an oath to obey the Führer of the German Reich and the people. But today this oath can no longer bind me. He who himself acts treacherously, who lies and betrays, who leads the entire German people to ruin, as he led the Sixth Army to it, has no right to demand loyalty. Our oath is ultimately given to the German people. It is to them we must remain loyal, to them we must help in any way we can. It is time to grab the hand of the destroyer of our people, to fight against him, even if we are prisoners. This is it. Why I join the Free Germany movement today. Our goal is a fatherland without Hitler, a new, free, better Germany. It is hard to say of my own life that the best years of it were given in vain to the service of an evil cause. I have come a long way to this realization. I belong to the generation that grew up after the First World War. At school and university, I experienced the chauvinistic education of those years. It insinuated that the German army had remained undefeated in the First World War and made extensive use of the imperialist Peace of Versailles to stir up revanchist feelings. Striving not to connect my life with politics, I saw the only way out in joining the Wehrmacht. I used to marvel at the fact that in Poland, in the north of Europe, at the beginning of the fighting in the West, we were caught by surprise by the enemy, that we were able to suddenly attack the Soviet Union. Only in captivity did I realize that these initial successes did not mean the superiority of German weapons at all, but testified to the fact that Hitler's Germany had violated all international law, violated all declarations of neutrality and non-aggression treaties. Could I be proud of such successes, such soldierly behavior? My illusions about war as a chivalrous battle disappeared, and I, a man who wanted to stay out of politics and therefore became a soldier, realized how much my actions actually served criminal politics. The same process was going on in me as in many young Germans in those years or later. And this process led me, like many others, to hate fascism and to recognize the new Germany. Awareness was followed by action. It was a matter not only of reason but also of feeling. In captivity, I gained a full understanding of the full extent of the Nazi crimes against humanity. I learned the truth about the crimes of fascism in Germany itself and in other countries. Connected with the condemnation of these crimes was the bitter realization that they were in fact made possible, primarily because first the Reichswehr and then the Wehrmacht had given them military protection and had stifled any domestic outrage against them. Once again, I realized that it was inadmissible to evade a political decision, and that any hesitation only increased responsibility. And one more thing I began to realize. The contradiction between the front and the rear, which had so angered me after my vacation in Germany and made me think about many things, was not the main contradiction of the time, as it seemed to me at the time. In the weeks I spent in Kassel, I equated the home front with the Nazi leadership, identifying myself with the front. Perhaps this was then an attempt to mitigate my own responsibility. I proceeded from external factors, resenting the crazy life in the rear, the superficiality with which decisions were made in Vinica. During discussions with German anti-fascists and Soviet officers, they pointed out to me that this contradiction could not be solved in isolation, that it was possible only together with the solution of the main contradiction between the plans of conquest, of world domination, of German imperialism, and the interests of the German people. I used to think that I was versed in German history, but in these conversations I had to see how wrongly I had interpreted it. It was only in captivity, far from my homeland, that I began to truly love my people, and despair was replaced by confidence that it was the defeat of German fascism that would help the people become masters of their own lives. The struggle for total clarity was my goal, and I threw off the last shackles of my old views. I am sure that the readers of my book approve of the decision I took then against Hitler and his state, in the name of the German people, in the name of Germany. What happened to me after the liberation of Germany from fascism can be told in a few words. I laboured. In those first post-war months of reconstruction, when it was necessary to provide the most basic necessities of life, I found myself faced with such tasks, which it was possible to solve only because I had experienced comrades by my side, and people whom I had not known at all before helped me with their work. As one of the burgomasters of Dresden and head of its supply companies, I saw again and again the confirmation of what I had realized in captivity. The German people are able to revive their homeland and take their destiny into their own hands. I chose the form of notes for this book, believing that in this way I would be able to portray the events of those weeks and months more vividly. From the first to the last word, I wrote as I thought and acted at the time, because I wanted to show from my own experience what happens to a person, what responsibility he assumes when he thinks he can evade a decision.